Thanks. Bye. Welcome everybody to Tech Tuesday number 29. As before, we will start with a moment of silence. Okay. Today we're going to talk about protecting and what does it mean to protect. And, people usually use the word protecting to say in general what the patent is doing, but I decided to dig in a little bit. So one possibility is to say that we're protecting against a specific product being copied. Another possibility is that we want to protect our market against competitors or new entrants. Or maybe what we're trying to protect is the company itself. Okay, the company itself, we want to keep it alive. It has relationships. It has a positioning in people's minds. It has customers. There are a lot of things we could be protecting. But I think the most interesting thing to protect is the flow of extracted value. That's usually money. In other words, we have a company. The company is trying to make money. And one of the jobs of IP is to make sure the money will continue to flow to the company. And of course, you can do other things with patents that are not even protection, but I'm not going to talk about them today. If we talked about value extraction, we have to talk about value creation. Now, it's true that IP itself can create value, but usually the traditional way of doing it, you have an innovation which creates value and the IP protects it. So the value could be direct or indirect, it could be consequences, it could be value in the future, it could just be creating of options, it can be a way of avoiding losing money. There's different types of values that innovation can create. And what's the goal of IP? The goal of IP is to help extract the value. So just two examples, direct and indirect value extraction. Let's say an innovator makes a better mousetrap. Because it's better, you can sell it for more money. Okay, so the inventor created value, you catch more mice more humanely, faster, and you directly get part of that value. People who enjoy the mousetrap are going to pay more money. Sometimes the value is not created directly, it's created indirectly, and the classic example is the App Store. If we didn't have the App Store, we wouldn't be able to buy applications so easily. Now, the value to the user, okay, I have a telephone, the value to me is that I can have the app and what the app is doing for me. But the ones who allow that value to be created are Apple or Google or some other big company. And that's why they get a share. Okay, so it's indirect value. And you might be asking yourself, what does this have to do with technically superior features? You know, usually we write a patent on a technological feature which is superior to what exists. The answer is, if you have a complete portfolio, you're also going to want to have claims about these features. But if our goal is to protect value, I'm not sure how it relates. Maybe we'll find out later today. When you have a client, you really have three basic types of relationships with a client. There could be more, but I think these are the most common ones. and each one requires something else from IP in order to help that value continue. The first one is they have to pay you. They don't want to, but they have to. And Lemelson, who got the patents on barcode readers, is an example of that. He sued people and said, either you pay me or I shut you down. I'm not giving you any value. And the reason why people paid was IP. So the job of IP was to enforce payment. Another possibility is I get value and I give payment. And it can be a commodity. For example, if I want to listen to music on Spotify, I pay the money, I listen to music. What keeps me from going to Amazon Music or some other music provider? Not much. There's habits, but also IP can be used to prevent me from moving. There might be some special feature that I get used to and that I like, and I can't get it somewhere else. It could also be a particular type of music. Another thing IP can be used for is to prevent the actual existence of an alternative provider. Okay, imagine if the world only had Spotify, well, then I couldn't move to anybody else. If I want that value, I have to give some money. The third type of relationship is that I get value and maybe I give payment. And one of the classic example is YouTube. I can watch movies on YouTube. I'm going to upload this talk onto YouTube, and I'm getting value for sure, and don't have to pay them. I mean, there is this option of watching movies and so on. A lot of people also talk about a fourth option, which I didn't show here intentionally, and that I get value and I give value, and together there's synergy. Obviously, if you have synergy when you're using a product, that's good for everybody, but it's not the subject of today. Value is not money. Okay, we're creating value, but we're trying to extract money. For example, money, we ask, who's giving it? Value, we ask, what is creating this value? Money is direct. Either you give me the money or you don't. If you give it to somebody else, then I'm not getting the money. Value, everybody can get. I can get it indirectly. And we'll see an example later. It's much easier to give somebody money than to give somebody value. Okay, money moves electronically. It's much easier to track money. See, bank account, ching, 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 I got money. If I got value, it's much more difficult to know, and therefore it's often underappreciated. And perhaps most interestingly, if we have a customer, the customer gets value at multiple points along the journey. Money, they usually pay only once. Okay, it's less common that you have a company selling a product and the customer who buys the product pays when he starts using the product, when he continues using the product, when he wants to modify the product. It is done, but because every time you take money from a customer, there's overhead and it causes perhaps a negative reaction, usually money happens only once or maybe twice, but value could happen multiple times. Let's get back to the main subject, which is how do we protect value extraction? Okay, innovator created value. Now we want to extract that value. First, we're assuming that there's a limited amount of value to extract. Why does that happen? Because a customer is only willing to pay a certain amount to solve this problem. And I'm not forgetting that innovators can often enlarge the pie. In any case, what I'm going to talk about now is a two-act logic. Positive, we want to use IP to support the ways that money flows. And negative, we want to prevent the amount of money going down or going elsewhere. So step one, You need to figure out what does your solution, and when I say solution, I mean the money, what does it look like? How is value being created? Who is willing to pay for the value? And how will that payment reach the innovator? And then our goal is to prevent other people from extracting value the same way, and especially not from the same people. The chart on the side shows you different parts of the travel industry, and the y-axis is, return on investment, and you can see that you lose money on airplanes and you make money on CRS, on catering, on travel agents, and so on. So I'm not going to talk about how much money you make on each one, but you have to be able to answer the question, where is money being made and how is that money going to get to me? So if you're an airline and the money is being made by travel agents, there's a problem here. And the more sophisticated the path of the money from the client to the innovator, the more business solutions you need and the more IP you need to make sure nothing falls out along the way. What do I mean fall out along the way? There's vulnerabilities. If you have money flowing from one place to another, there's all sorts of ways that the money cannot make it to you. And I have here a list, and I'm going to go in detail about each one of them. But the idea is that you identify the vulnerabilities and you fix them. We're IP people, and the question we ask is, how do we fix these vulnerabilities using IP? So let's take a look. And in order to make it all make sense, I invented a company, and we're going to talk about the problems. So COVID, which is having a resurgence now, causes loss of smell by damaging the nerves. Our inventor discovered that if you encourage blood flow to the nerves, over here, it will assist the regeneration. So he invented a device that you put over here, and I'm not going to go into the anatomy, which encourages blood flow to the nerves. Okay, so far it's a classic medical device invention, and guess what? He also files a patent. Who is getting value and who is paying money? So the patient is definitely getting value because now they can enjoy good food again. And maybe now they have to change their clothes more often. Okay. The HMO perhaps is not getting value because it's not really affecting the health of the patient, but the patients are demanding this to be fixed, and that's going to cost the HMO money to provide. The ENT doctors, okay, ear, nose, and throat, they're also getting value. Why? Because people who wouldn't come to them before are now coming to them, and not only are they coming to them, but people which want to regenerate, it takes a few weeks or a few months perhaps, and it's a semi-chronic condition, and now they have not only digital monitoring of the patients, which by the way has a separate code for payment, but they also have ongoing contact with the patients, which means that the job and workflow is much nicer. So who's going to be paying? The ENTs, the HMO, the patient? It's not for us to decide, but the client has to decide. And now let's see how the vulnerabilities I talked about before will actually work out. So first we're going to talk about the meta game and capping. So a customer usually has the limited funds he's willing to spend on the product. And when we say product, we actually mean a solution to their problem. So let's say the patient is willing to spend $1,000 on regaining the loss of smell. How much will the innovator get? So when you have something called capping, you have a competitor sitting at the end of the value chain and collecting the money. And they can do that using IP, meaning they get a patent. And in order to use your product, somebody has to infringe that patent. So they sue you and give you a license and take, 20% of your profit, or they can actually have a product which sits there and people have to buy. So in this example, we encourage blood flow to the nose. It can cause nosebleeds, okay, which is bad. So the competitor invents an algorithm and files an app, a patent for an app on how to control the amount of treatment in order to avoid nosebleeds. Now, can somebody buy a device without the app? Argument's sake, they can't. Why? Nobody's going to buy a device which suddenly makes them gushing from the nose. What is the IP solution? When our inventor files a patent on the device, he should have identified potential capping situations and described enough, or even filed enough patent or whatever, in order to prevent a competitor from getting such a blocking patent. Okay? If you don't do it, it can very well be the case that you invent step one and the competitor invents step two, and that's the end of it. Metagame. Metagame has to do with the fact that when I said we have a problem and we want to solve it, there's always a bigger game around it. So I said the problem was loss of smell, but the bigger game is COVID and what happens afterwards. So a competitor, let's say a drug company, can sell a product. We said the customer is willing to pay $1,000 for loss of smell, sells the product for $2,000, which includes a cure for COVID and a different treatment, which isn't very good, okay, for loss of smell. What is the patient going to buy? Is he going to buy two products, one from me and one from the competitor, or just one product? Well, if he uses up all of his money on the competitor, he's going to tell me, this patient, I'm only willing to pay $300 for getting my sense of smell back because I already spent $1,700 on this drug. And metagame type 2 is the competitor sells part of the solution, which is not actually competing with us. But in the patient's mind, since COVID is one thing and loss of smell is part of it, if the competitor sells only a cure for COVID for $1,500, it could be that automatically he's only willing to spend $500 on what I'm doing. Now, I don't know how to help the second one. The first one, you can get IP on a bundle and block the competitor from offering a bundle. The second type, I don't know how to help it, but it's a risk that you have of somebody reducing the amount of money that people can pay you. Siphoning. This, by the way, is a siphon cup. This blue ribbon, purple ribbon, shows you a pathway from the top to the bottom. Apparently, it's a trick cup. If you don't know how to hold it correctly, you can't drink from it. What happens in siphoning? That's when the money somehow gets lost along the way. Okay, the client's willing to pay $1,000, but somehow it disappears. For example, we filed a patent on a non-disposable device. The client realizes that he needs to include a disposable component. Guess what? It's being sold also by the competition, and you don't have IP to protect it. So the client is going to pay $500 for your device and $200 to somebody else with a disposable instead of paying you $500. If you have good IP, you can force the client to buy the disposable from you. The point is that you have to identify where along the way the money might be siphoned out to different use. Hijacking is when the revenue stream as a whole or the customer is stolen. So the first example, if the treatment is chronic, that you get it every week for years, you lose a client because the client is buying the product only from the competitor, and maybe the competitor will start adding another service, and before you know it, they start with you and continue with somebody else. You create a client, they're your client for a little bit, and somebody hijacks them. IP, theoretically, that's why I say can be used to block any way of making money off such a client. And if you have IP which prevents anybody from making money off of your client, then they can't hijack the client. Okay? It's a very tall order. Alternatives and price crushing. What if the competitor supplies an alternative product? Okay, turns out there's a cream, you rub it over here, it has the same effect. Now clients have to choose if to buy a cream or to buy your device. Now the problem is that Innovators usually ignores this type of competitor. I mean, it's a drug, it's a cream, it's not a device. It works differently, but from the client's perspective, from the patient, there might be no difference between them. IP could be used if the innovator is aware. The other problem is, what if somebody offers an alternative product at a very low price? The cream is sold for $10. If the cream is sold for $10, we cannot sell a device to most of the market for $1,000. Okay? Because the cream, anchors the value of the solution in patients' minds. And again, I don't have any good IP type solution unless we're able to block all alternative products, or unless our device has some special value added that you can't provide with the alternative product. Leeches. Okay, that's a leech in the picture. They suck your blood, but they have several ways of doing it. One way is they threaten you and say, give me money or we'll sue you. Another way is they call up your customer, your distributor, and they say, give money or we won't let you buy from the innovator. Another possibility is they threaten a third party. It's not somebody in your chain of value. Why is that a problem? Well, theoretically, let's say the leech is just, using IP and threatening you. If you have freedom to operate opinions and you do design rounds, you can overcome the problem. But what if it's the HMO? What if we're selling to the patient and the HMO, of course, doesn't care which product the patient uses. If the patient if they only have to do a copay of, $10, but your competitor got a patent on how the HMO monitors the effectiveness of the treatment. And now your competitor goes to the HMO and says, you're only allowed to do this if the patient bought my product. Otherwise, you're infringing. Now, we have no control over how the HMO does what it does. Maybe even the HMO doesn't have. So just because we have a design round doesn't mean we can convince the HMO to change what they're doing. In any case, I'm sure everybody knows, freedom to operate opinions are not perfect. They have to be part of a risk assessment, and you definitely have to assume that some money will be leached away from you, which means you might need more proactive options like patent pools, suing people. That's not so good against trolls. Filing oppositions and acts like that are more effective against trolls. Let's talk for a second how money, and this is shell money from ancient China. How does money reach the innovator? And I'm reminding you that every step of the way is at risk that somebody will steal the money. So, the distributor. let's say the one who gives out the disposables, if the distributor does not add value to the client, to the patient, you might need IP in order to protect the relationship between the distributor and the patients. Otherwise, the patients will just buy from a different distributor. If the distributor was giving value, that could be different. A licensee, okay? If you're working in a different country, you usually have a licensee. If you're doing things like monitoring services, but your company specializes in building hardware gadgets, you might license it out, and you have a risk of hijacking and siphoning, especially if your licensee decides to work with competitors. And often you can't stop that. What if you have direct payment? The patient pays you directly. Well, if the patient is paying you directly, you have a contract, and I put it in quotes because it's not a written contract, of what benefit you're giving the patient in return for which the patient is giving you money. You can use IP on that contract in order to prevent the competitors from offering the same type of benefit for the same type of payment. Okay, so different ways of getting money mean you need to have different IP. I put here some top level entities. You see we have a patient, we have a monitoring service, we have the innovator, we have a distributor, we have different types of competitors, HMOs, a doctor. And it's a very simple situation. Red shows who gives who value. So for example, the distributor is giving the patient value because it's easier for the patient to find. The innovator is giving his competitor value, okay, red line, because now there's a market for disposables. Before that, there wasn't. So now the competitor is getting value from the innovator. That's bad. Green is who's giving money to who. And you see a few with reverse arrows. That means that perhaps we're taking money away from them. Two notes. Note number one, if we have a competitor and we're giving him license, we can force the competitor to add value to us. Second interesting note, I said the disposable competitor, competitor who makes disposables is getting value because we're creating the market. But we can also control how much value they get. And I like the example of the App Store. So Apple has an App Store, and because Apple has an App Store, a game like Candy Crush comes into existence. And everybody's buying it. But if everybody's buying it, we want to sell it also on Google. Now, that means that Apple has just created value for Google, because now Google will also have this app. So one of the things that Apple does is they have all of these special standards for what you have to have in order for the app to be approved by Apple. And it means that it makes it more difficult for somebody to make an app which can work simultaneously both on Apple and on Google. They have to work harder. If cross-platform programming is more difficult, then the value that Apple creates for Google is lower. So this issue of you can't avoid creating value for various players, but you can avoid how much value they're getting. So where do we put IP here? And I gave a previous talk, a link here, which talks about it, but in very general terms. There's a pathway, one of these pathways, the green ones in particular. We can use IP to prevent deviation from the pathway so the money doesn't, go somewhere else. And we can use IP to prevent pathways from happening. We can block a pathway. We can prevent something happening at one of these nodes, like prevent the HMO from doing something. We can make activity of a particular node easier by licensing or other activities. And of course, we can extract value from a node or a pathway using the IP. And I'm started with the pathways because people often ignore the pathways and think only about the nodes. But if you have a map showing who's getting value and who's sending money, so we can talk about what needs to go where. So the process is, after we decided what the vulnerabilities or needs are, we figure out what IP might work, and then we obtain it. Or we have existing IP and we decide which IP is more valuable based on where the vulnerabilities are and so on. Hijacking is the client already was created and somebody steals it. Preemption is before that. It's modifying the sales funnel in such a way that clients go to the competitor. And this is well known. So let's say that the ENT is a source for clients. People call up the doc, ear, nose, and throat and say, I lost my sense of smell, what should I do? You want the ENT to say, get the sticker. You don't want him to say, sticker or cream, I don't care which one. If you have IP, you can block alternatives at the ENT. But there's also a positive way of doing it. Remember, I said that our device gives the ENT value. If you give somebody value, you can build a relationship with them. And maybe there's also payment involved, and I don't care in which direction. The minute you have a relationship, he's more likely to be on your side. If you have a relationship, you can protect it using IP. Or, what I said the competitors should do, pre-disease functionality. Before you lose your sense of smell, you buy a package that includes a vaccine and a sticker, a cream to put on your forehead the minute you get sick. Okay? So that's another type of preemption. It's simply an earlier stage in the game. So why is this important? It means that when you try to analyze where you might lose money, you have to go before where you're starting to make money and before where you have contact with the client. Because even if you're only talking to the client after the ENT gets to him, if somebody else talks to the client before, you're never going to get that client. I mentioned before value flow, and Yaakov did some very interesting things here, so I'm unabashedly stealing it and showing it. And the question is, how do we tie this whole issue of value creation with IP? And I'm only going to show it very briefly. And the idea is that we show a table of steps, and of course steps is oversimplification, and it's really simplified what I'll show you. I'm not showing you the entire journey. I'm ignoring most of the features of the product. I'm ignoring most of the actors. I'm not being very specific what different values are being created. And I'm not talking about how other people IP can affect you, how other business moves can affect you, and how you're reducing values to other people. Okay? So after explaining how oversimplified it is, patient identifies a loss of smell. Of course, it could be a step before that. Patient knows they're at risk of losing smell. I didn't put it in. You don't have any technology here. You don't have any IP here. You could, of course. The value to the patient is that now they know that they've lost their sense of smell. Distributor, ear, nose, and throat, and other actors, nothing. Then the patient goes to the ear, nose, and throat, and he applies the technology. He has a procedure of diagnosis, which might be something we've provided. And what the value the patient is getting is hope. Now he hopes, he believes he'll get better. The ENT gets a happy client. Now the patient has to go buy the device. The value he can get, and this time it's from the distributor, is that it's easy for him to buy the device. The value the distributor gets is now the patient knows the good products come from that distributor. Now the patient actually uses the device. So the technology we have is a specific electrification protocol, the hardware, whatever. We protect it using IP. The value to the patient is that they get cured. Okay, then we have a monitoring step, and I'll just skip to the last one, which is a weaning step. You want to stop using the device and not reverse what's happening. There's some sort of protocol for doing it. We protect it using a patent, and the value to the patient is now he is free from your product. Okay, so like I said, the journey is more complex than this in both dimensions, but at each step we can ask ourselves, what value is each person getting, and how much are they willing to pay for that value, and then how are we going to get the value, and what IP will make sure that we get money for the value and not somebody else. In summary, some useful habits to keep in mind. You have to think not only about technology and not only about leverage, but also the money side of the business, which is basically who is getting the value and who's paying. You should prevent capping by describing the whole value chain, and if you do it right, it will also prevent preemption. You should be aware there's a metagame, and that's a way for people to just work around your patents. They're not going to offer your products, they're just going to dry you out. Waiting until you have product market fit in order to figure out the business model could be too late. Okay, because by then, maybe you can't file IP to prevent hijacking, and maybe somebody else already filed IP. One thing I didn't talk about at all, I just mentioned it, is shaping the ecosystem. When you come with a new product, the ecosystem is going to change. You should do it intentionally, and you should have IP ready for it. And remember, your competitor also wants to shape the ecosystem, and everybody wants to shape the ecosystem, so money comes to you. So in summary of the entire thing is, how is the innovator going to make money? And our job as IP people is to make sure the innovator makes money and continues to make money. So talking about bucks, I just have here an example. We invented a product. I'm asking you, how might the client make the money? And then what vulnerabilities and how can IP help with that? I am now stopping the recording, and if anybody has any questions,